spectrum food.
It's definitely the best food that I've ever had anything to do with. It seems to produce almost no organic waste. It seems to take a long time to break down if the fish miss it. And the colours of the fish that this food produces I've found to be really awesome without being any sort of hormone food. So I've found that you can feed this to almost all fish with, in my opinion, almost unparalleled results. Now, I still don't think it substitutes for variety. I like to feed my fish a good variety of foods. I'll feed them everything from brine shrimp to ocean plankton. I'm very minimalist to nothing in my bloodworms, because I do find that if I feed a lot of bloodworms, that particularly my tangs and my more herbivorous fish tend to become quite aggressive. So be careful with high protein foods. Now, there's all different opinions on when to feed a reef aquarium, and at the end of the day there isn't really a right or wrong, because it's going to be a little bit governed by what sort of fish are in your tank. Now, with a tank full of tangs, you tend to keep your feeding fairly minimal because they're going to be grazing off a lot of algae and getting a lot of nutrients within the tank itself. And if you are going to keep a lot of fish like tanks, it's really important not to feed a lot of protein, not to feed a lot of bloodworms, not to feed a lot of easily digestible foods, because they've got a fairly long digestive system, and it tends to make them fairly aggressive. It tends to, with time, make them lose colour and make them more susceptible to problems like head and lateral line disease. So especially when you see a tank that's been in an aquarium for a long time, you can really see those enlarged pores. Most of the time that's due to a lack of vitamin A and vitamin C, so that means someone's fed a lot of bloodworms and a lot of high protein foods to the wrong sorts of fish. Now, I'll usually feed a reef aquarium pretty much once a day to once every 2 days, depending on the fish that are in the aquarium. When you're feeding, I generally go by the 30-second rule, which means I put a little bit of food into the aquarium. If there's one speck of food visible after 30 seconds, then I usually assume that was too much. Also, make sure that you monitor the fish carefully by observation. Now, if with time you see the fish is getting a little bit skinny, seems to be losing condition, that would indicate to you to either vary the type of foods that you're feeding a bit more, or just simply feed a little bit more to the fish. You're not aiming to have the fish being fat by any means. If they've got any sorts of bulging tummies, if they're looking at all fat, then that would almost guarantee you are overfeeding your fish. They're supposed to be quite slimline, so then when you look at the fish, by no means are they thin at all, but at the same time we're not really aiming to have any sorts of belly. So definitely spend time observing the fish. If you see they're getting any fatter, reduce the amount of food. If you see they're getting any thinner, then either vary or increase the amounts of food. Now, definitely the single major mistake that most people tend to make is in regards to water flow. Now, when I am invited to people's houses to try and, let's say, rehash their aquariums, the main mistake they tend to make is not having enough dissolved oxygen in the water, because they'll have a lot of current in the aquarium, or often just not enough, which is either directed towards the bottom or the mid of the aquarium. I'm really under the belief that you really want your water flow directed straight across the top of the surface, and what you're aiming for is surface agitation. You want your surface to be as agitated with as much movement as possible. As soon as your water becomes still at the top, you form a film across the top of the water, which just doesn't allow gas to exchange. So the only way we're going to get good gas exchange is by providing a lot of surface agitation, pretty much right across the top of the tank. Now, definitely when you are aiming your power heads, make sure that they're not aiming at any corals. And I find the best way to provide really good water current in my aquarium and not aim my power heads at them is to place the power heads on the back glass, aiming up. So therefore they're pretty much aiming from back to front and aiming straight across the surface. So therefore we're getting a massive amount of surface agitation as the current comes around. Then the current sweeps straight down the front glass, then towards the back, and then of course back up again. So I find this sort of water flow is definitely, in my opinion, more effective than this sort of water flow. if you go for this sort of water flow, not only is it a lot harder to get the same amount of water momentum, also that means that you're blowing straight across your corals, which just doesn't tend to allow the same sort of extensions as if you provide this sort of water current.